So the last component of Reader's Workshop that we're going to talk about is the Reader's Notebook. The goal of the Reader's Notebook is to really personalize the experience, but it also serves as your connection to the reader as a teacher. It's a tool for reflection. It is a tool to track growth. It is a tool to have students respond. But like everything I stress in this class, forget all the assessments, forget all the growth. Everything needs to be about encouraging the reading and the love of the word. And so you want to, more so than making your reader's notebook a tool, like, oh, I got to check your reading log. Did you read 23 pages last night? No, you really want it to be a tool that builds a love for books or a love for text as we expand what we define as text. But this idea that you want the reader's notebook to be a conduit to connect the learner to the ideas that the author brings. So there's many different purposes. You might want to basically, first is encourage reader response. You want students responding to what they're reading. You might want to reinforce the comprehension strategy instruction that you're doing in your mini lessons. So you start here with the mini lesson, and you go here to guided practice. Then you turn here to your reader's notebook for independent practice. So you're reinforcing some of the comprehension strategy instruction that you're doing in younger grade. The reader's notebook should be a vehicle to increase the choice of reading materials in your students. It allows them to explore topics that they might love. It allows them to keep track of what they're reading. It allows them to celebrate themselves as a reader. The reader notebook should scaffold your instruction. It should scaffold things like self-assessment. It should scaffold reader response. And finally, it's a tool for you as a teacher for assessment. And we'll talk today about all these varying purposes. Now, I was both a first grade teacher, an 8th grade teacher, a 6th grade teacher. Well, actually, transitional kindergarten, kids that were doing an additional year. That's where I started student teaching and then spent time afterwards in that classroom. But it's different in the upper grades, the reader's notebook. I think for 308s, I mean, a lot of times you could be just tracking, sentences, or you're going to have the kids writing short words. And the amount of customizability, I think, increases as students get older, because you want to remove some of those scaffolds. And eventually to the point where most of my middle school readers' notebooks were just blank composition books. But at the elementary level, I don't see any problem putting in additional scaffolds. At the early childhood level, when I do readers' notebooks, you might be tracking just, a lot of oral language or a lot of drawing or there's a lot of elements in the early childhood reader's notebook that can be done. Kids can talk about smiley faces. They can draw picture responses to the books that they're reading. They can track some of their sight words that they come across in those books. So there's lots of strategies that we can do at the 308 level. Most importantly, make your reader's notebook customizable. That should be the first assignment you give a kid. Here's your notebook. Go decorate. Why do we do that? First thing, just give them the blank notebook, say go decorate. What's that?
Interested.
What?
Gets them interested.
Yeah, it gets them interested. It makes it theirs, so we're personalizing their learning experience. But why else? How does it help you as a teacher?
You know what they're interested
Yes, it's like a quick survey of what they're interested in so it can help you match readers to books. Because you can look at it, if there's pictures of ponies or cars or sports figures, you know what that student's interested in and you can match them to their books. Students can track their personal reading goals, they can have reflections, reading logs, and genre guides. So these are all common features that you'll often see in a reader's notebook. Oops. So for like the reading goals, remember, think back to all of the videos we've watched in this class. Between the mini lessons and the conferences, they always left, what's your goal for next week, right? We saw that in Rick's videos, we saw that in, I forget the other woman's name, on the Carnegie website. So why not have students keep track of those goals? And this is from, it's on scholastic.com, Newingham, 2009. If you literally just Google Reader's Notebook, there's a phenomenal article on scholastic.com that goes step by step on how to build this. And a lot of the words and images, like this is just lifted right from there. Just want to give credit to where my images come from. So, I will try to read historical fiction this month. I will try to stop after every chapter and think. So here you have a genre goal. Here you have, who am I, the reading process goal. Remember we talked about the different kinds of conferences and the different kinds of mini lessons? This is a genre-based one. This is a reading process-based goal. And sometimes you might need to give sentence starters to kids for their goals. So it's okay to have posters up there about like fluency or genre, and leave them up, because the goals aren't just picked by the students. You're meeting with them, remember, during conference time. So you'll be setting reading goals with your students. And if you want every one of these, please don't write them down now. You can go find that article. I'll also post the PowerPoint and the link to the YouTube of today's lecture. So you don't have to write all these down. But I just want to give you some examples. So here's some thinking goals. Reread something when it doesn't make sense. So fix-it strategies. Use post-it notes. Some thinking about reading behavior goals. All right. And again, I do encourage you to read the Newingham article. I didn't assign it as an assigned reading, but it's short, and it will be like one of the first results if you just Google Reader's Notebook. Most importantly are the reflections to the reading. This is where the Reader's Notebook is super powerful. And you can do a few different things. If you're in a kindergarten classroom, you're later in the year or first grade, and they're starting to write sentences, maybe towards end of kindergarten, beginning of first grade, or they can just draw their pictures. In early childhood, first grade, I mean, this is a little bit more detailed. I'm guessing this is probably a first or second grade picture. If you use the big books and the sticky note strategy that we talked about, just 4 squares, and the kids can pop their sticky notes right in there. You could give them, just a date. For your older students, your 3rd, 4th, 5th grade students, no. Put a date on the page, write a reflection. You don't need as many scaffolds for your older readers. You might have to give them a prompt or an idea, but often I just give them a blank page. And after this, I'll pull up another presentation on how to set up for if you do shared novels, common reads. I'll show you an example of how to set up Reader's Notebook for that. Now, reading logs. I hemmed and hawed about having you guys use a reading log or sharing them with you. I don't really support the idea, but they're used quite often. The reading log basically has students keep track of the dates and the number of pages that they've read. But reading isn't a race. It shouldn't be read 20 pages a night, read 15 pages a night. It's not, reading isn't a chore, it's a passion. So I think that often reading logs can turn that passion into a chore. So what I do love though, is if you do a reading log, see this fourth column here? They have to do something with it. They need to write some kind of brief reflection or a quick summary, something to keep track. On the other hand, the reading logs do show you that students are reading. And that might be a goal. Yet without this fourth column here, anybody can write, it's Tuesday, I read pages 10 to 14. And then, your older students can go on to Spark Notes and figure out what 10 to 14 was, and then just write one sentence. So it's ripe for students to figure out ways to manipulate. Doesn't mean they're, and I don't really blame them because reading's not supposed to be a chore. And when we chorify reading, that's a scientific term, chorify, you can often create opportunities for malfeasance. Genre guides. We've talked about the idea that in the level of choice that you can have in a reader's workshop, no choice is, here's our shared reading, we're all reading this novel. Some choice are, here's our class sets, like we did in this classroom. You guys are reading Maze Runner, you're reading Al Capone Does My Shirts. You have to choose a book out of some books. Another level of choice that we've often talked about is letting kids just pick by genre. So by the end of the semester, you have to read one book in every genre. Or you might do it even less choice, where it's like, all right, everybody, we're going to do our mystery unit now. You can go pick any book, but it has to be a mystery. Then you have the reader's workshop approach, where it's complete freedom of choice. If it's, two levels of complete freedom of choice, one being very restrictive. You may choose as long as it's at your reading level. Like you have a level book. You know how I feel about that, I'm not a fan. Or you can just choose. And if you do that, you can have kids track what kind of books that they read. Now, assessment and a reader's notebook. The first thing you really want to look for is not some rubric or not some, did they complete the reading log? No. First you want, are they using the reader's notebook? Are they passionate about it? Or do they write reflections? But, that being said, you can use reader's notebooks for self-evaluation, where the kids have their own little rubrics, and they have to, here's an example of a self-evaluation of my fluency skills. You can use the reader's notebooks to assess reading responses. You can use formalized rubrics to look at those reading responses. Grab a few each month and track students' writing of their reading responses, a more formalized assessment. Or you can use the reading responses as a tool to collect resources for a portfolio system. So you tell your readers, I want you to pick 2 of your best reading responses and reflect and tell me why they're best. And choose 2 of them that you thought you should have developed more. And what strategies should you have done as a reader and a writer to develop those responses. So it can be a raw data source for a portfolio system. So as a teacher, there's lots of ways for you to figure out how you can assess a reader's notebook. But remember, don't conflate assessment with grading. For those of you who just read my last blog post, that's kind of what I was writing about, and how I want to use assessment more to learn about my teaching and my students versus judging my students against each other. Or, just assigning a random number. It's not great. Assessment is not grading. Assessment's looking for knowledge growth, personalized goals, and improving your own instruction. Okay, you're looking for gains in knowledge. Can students do more and learn more? Blah, 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 blah. Do students know more and can they do more after you've taught? That's why it should drive in your instruction. Your assessment with your reader's notebook should be formative. It needs to show the knowledge growth over time. The entries that your students write in September should be different than the ones they write in November, in February, in March, and in May. There needs to be a degree of autonomy in the reflections and the responses that students write. Otherwise, you're not doing a notebook, you're just giving them a binder full of worksheets that you're making them do. And that's not how good readers read. You need to use this assessment data to differentiate your instruction for your students. For the early childhood students, this might be more of, your notes in conjunction with the students. Do they recognize what they should do at a capital letter? Do they know what to do at different punctuation marks? Can they write a few sight words? And your reader's notebook needs to be ongoing and part of the reader's workshop routine. It's not some one-off that we just do. It's not an assignment. It's not a project. It needs to be built into your classroom experience. There should be some part of your room where maybe you store all the reader's notebooks. And this night, celebrate the work of your students. How do you do that? Well, most importantly, have your own reader's notebook. Model, model, model. They're decorating a reader's notebook, you decorate a reader's notebook. If they're writing a reading reflection, you're writing a reading reflection. If they're drawing a picture for the beginning, middle, and end of the story in a pre-K or early childhood or kindergarten classroom, that's what you're doing. You're drawing the middle, beginning, and end of the story. Middle, beginning, and the end? Wow. I don't know how to sequence. But the goal is to always model for them. Because we're trying to, again, celebrate a love for the word. Some of the ideas you can do. Oh, and this is the other section, and I'll show you this link at the end. There's two teachers put up an amazing presentation that they did at one of their school conferences on the utilization of the Reader's Notebook. And it's a Google site. That will also pop up if you just Google Reader's Notebook. It'll be up there, but I'll share the link at the end of the presentation too. Another amazing resource, and that's where I got this idea from. Student forms of guiding questions. So, student as a reader, how has learning about helped you understand your book better? So, what is one thing you want to improve about your reading? What kind of comprehension strategy. What kind of visualizing do you find yourself doing most? How do you help understand the story? What gets in the way of you being able to understand a story or being in the story? Notebook strategies. So you can give them prompts. And it does help. And like I said, I do probably more prompting when I'm doing readers' notebooks in 3rd and 4th grade, and I start to remove some of that prompts in 5th and 6th grade. You can use rubrics as part of your assessments. But again, be careful, careful, careful. You do not want the students to fear their readers' notebooks. You want them to love their notebooks. You want them to like get excited when you tell them to take it out. And if you attach too much to the assessment, it then becomes a project and not a tool. Do most of your assessment in the small conference times. Don't just assess the reader's notebook for completion, but you're looking really at the responses. You could have the kids do their own kind of their own self-reflections on the reader responses. And then you could also use a more formal teacher-based rubric for reading responses. You can also tell kids to just take out their two best and hand them in and assess them that way, so it's kind of detached from the reader's notebook. And you're also involving them in the choice of their own material. Pick your two, all right, we just finished your book. Pick the two best responses that you've written this entire book and put them in the basket to hand in. You're involving them in the curating of their own learning. And you're also now removing the assessment from the notebook. And bonus, you don't have to carry home 40 readers' notebooks, which totally is not fun. You'll see, it just isn't. So there's different strategies and ways to do that. So here's the links to the to basically the two places that inform this presentation. I will throw this up on Blackboard and the video up on YouTube when we're done. All right. Before we move into our readers workshops groups, so you guys can talk about and discuss your novels and then discuss your rough drafts of your mini lessons, I want to show you some ideas that you could do for your if you're teaching a whole novel. So often, and I'm not, I'm not dead set against in any way the whole whole book classroom. I think there's a lot of reward in teaching having everyone read the same text. Same way that we actually had you folks do it for your first year experience with the Common Read. So if I'm setting up a reader's notebook for a shared novel where they're all reading the same book, these are some of the ideas that I often use with my students. And granted, these are older students, third grade. In second grade, instead of a plot diagram, I might do like 4 squares and they have to draw or write one sentence from the beginning, 2 events in the middle, and in the end. Or I might call it the problem solution. What was the problem in the story? What are 2 things people did to solve? What are 2 things that happened, and then what's one way they solved the problem, the solution? But I set this up. I'll take a binder or a composition book. I'll tell them to write vocab, flip 5 pages. Take 2 big pages and draw your plot diagram. I would draw it on the smartboard, but I can't even find the plug. Have a section to make predictions. What's going to happen? Have a section for chapter summaries. So obviously, if we're talking chapter books, we're definitely not, we're talking older students. I love doing character bio pages, setting them up kind of like baseball cards, or I've also done them like Facebook profile pages, where they have to, kind of make a fake Facebook page right in their notebooks about each character. Favorite quotes from the book that they can add. And then, most importantly, the connections and the reflections to their reading, the reader response. So you can do Reader's Notebook with a shared novel. And it's fun. The kids really enjoy it. All right. Any questions about Reader's Notebook and how it fits into the Reader's Workshop model? Our reading, I think they talked about it a lot. One of the articles, they were very into choice and non-basal reading. And the other article talked about leveling kids during Reader's Workshop. That's, up to you and your district policy as how you set that up. Questions about the reading or about the presentation? Yes, ma'am.
So are we just doing a mini lesson, or are we doing the mini lessons, the conferencing, and?
Well, if it's about the assignment, I'll stop the recording, we can go over that. But any questions about actually Reader's Notebooks or any of the topics?